If you're like me and you have part of your yard that you just aren't sure what to do with, maybe it's really weedy or overwhelming or bigger than you know how to manage, well, today's for you. About a year ago, we started a big 3-year project in partnership with High Country Gardens. It's our wildlife garden, and it's been just about a year since we started to put all of those plants into place. And I want to show you what that looked like before and what it looks like now. It's been an exciting process, and it's just starting to wake up for the spring again, and I'm excited to show you what's going on. So let's get started. Here is a look at our wildlife garden 1 year in. So when we bought this house halfway between Denver and Boulder here in Colorado, it was a mess. It had been neglected, it had been abandoned for a while, and the front yard was just horrid. It is nothing but weeds and some invasive species, and I was completely overwhelmed and depressed by it, frankly. And that meant I just didn't know what to do with it. So we built some beds up against the house, and those were very pretty, but the rest of the yard looked terrible. And there were even areas where grass and weeds would not even grow. It was so bad. And we had erosion issues because the slope and everything, it was just a mess. But what I wanted to do was create habitat. I wanted our yard to be a place where insects and birds and little mammals and every little creature comes. I wanted it to feel natural. And so I started to do some research, and I took a class from Kelly D. Norris about the new naturalism and naturalistic planting schemes. And I read and I read and I read. And then I approached High Country Gardens and I said, look, I want to show people what this is like from the very beginning, not what a planting scheme looks like 3 years into it when it's gorgeous and lush and beautiful, but what it looks like from day one and how that works. So this is the project. We had defined this L-shaped area around our yard where we would be doing this naturalistic planting scheme. And the first shipment of plants came in May of 2023, and there were 800 plants, roughly. I supplemented that with some trees and shrubs and other things that weren't available from High Country Gardens, and we got to work. In order to plant this and prepare the site, I killed off all of the grass and weeds in that L-shaped area, and then we put down layers of building paper. And I had laid out an entire planting scheme that uses wedge-shaped kind of blocks and laid out where each plant was going to go within those wedge shapes. So we worked wedge to wedge. We used lumber to lay out the wedges. We worked wedge to wedge and first put down a layer of builder's paper and then 2 to 4 inches of food-based compost, because food-based compost is less likely to have weed seeds in it. And then we used an auger and put in 50 holes and planted 50 plants, and then put in 50 more holes and planted 50 plants, and we worked that way all the way across. It took us 3 full days of working to get it came out to be almost 1,000 plants planted in those 3 days. This was no mean feat, and we had some friends who came to help us, and it was actually really, really fun. And in the end, this is what it looked like. Lots of little plants, lots of empty space, but lots and lots of promise. You'll notice we also put in some logs. We had a tree taken down, so we put the logs in there to add to some biomass and create some kind of nesting areas. There are trees and shrubs in there as well, and lots of layers of planting. Then over the summer, obviously this needed to be irrigated. We don't have irrigation here, and so I hand watered all of this through the summer months. And fortunately, we had a historically wet spring that spring, and so the watering was not onerous at all. And by fall, the blooms, you guys, I mean, it was unbelievable. All these little plants that were so small were still blooming and blooming, and we just had bees and butterflies, and I mean, just every kind of creature was already starting to take hold in this wildlife garden by the fall. We got another shipment of plants from High Country Gardens to fill in some holes and to do some more kind of infill work there. But that was a much smaller shipment of plants. And then we just let this garden rest through the fall and in the winter. I didn't cover anything. I did water. I did some winter watering, especially of the shrubs and trees when we hadn't had moisture in a couple of weeks. But that's pretty standard practice for Colorado, actually. But things just really grew in and flourished. And even in the winter, when covered in snow, the garden was gorgeous. I left all of the seed heads. I didn't cut anything back. And so they were there, and they were a food source for birds. And one frosty morning I came out, we had hoarfrost, and there was the swipe of a bird wing on the top of one of the stumps. So I know that even when I'm not watching, there are animals using this incredible wildlife garden, and it's not even, I mean, it's really in its infancy, which is so cool. My office window looks out over the wildlife garden, and one day a few weeks ago, a golden eagle swooped across my window and landed in a tree across the street. It had clearly caught something in the wildlife garden, which was really an amazing thing to know and to see too. So now here we are, it's spring, we're almost to the 1-year anniversary of this planting project, and things are starting to wake up again. And I can tell you, it's gorgeous out there. And the really cool part of it all is that I am starting to see that pattern emerge that I had planned in my head and planned down on paper. It's starting to emerge. It's not something where it will be visible to most people, but I can see it. These patterns of highs and lows that are going to come inside this planting. There are a few things that I need to address here in year 2. The rock garden area, which is an old landscaping project from a previous homeowner, I didn't take it out because there are some really big exposed tree roots for our cottonwood tree in that rock garden area. And to remove those rocks would have required heavy machinery, and I was just too worried that we might damage those tree roots. So I need to do some more intentional planting there. I kind of neglected it last spring, and so that needs some more work. There are lots of weeds coming up, so I'm going to be out. I weed about once a week out there, and there are plenty of weeds coming up. But I also found in my greenhouse, I had this old bag of a wildflower seed mix from American Meadows. And a couple of months ago, I sprinkled that out in, and in amongst the weeds, I'm starting to see some wildflowers come up. So that's exciting too. We'll see how that kind of fills in. There are still going to be a few blank spots. There's this old adage about native plants that the first year they sleep, the second year they creep, and the third year they leap. And here we're entering into year 2, so they're going to creep this year, which is fine, but that means there will still be some bare soil. And so my hope is that those seeds fill in a little bit in that bare soil so that I don't have quite so much weed pressure and weeding to do this year, but we'll see. That is something that just is going to be what it is until all of the ground is really covered. And part of the theory behind this kind of planting is that the more densely planted these planting structures are, the less the weed pressure is, because it just shades out the weeds. So we'll get there eventually, but this is definitely a process. Be sure to like and subscribe and check out all the links in the description below. There are links to website pages and other information about what we did, how we did it, and what the results have been. Happy gardening!